My name is Agent Void. It's not a title I chose, but it works well enough for what I do. I operate in missions that most people will never know existed, cases that slip beyond human comprehension and into the realm of the impossible. Operation Nightmare was the code name given to my latest case, and if you're hearing this now, it's probably already too late. But I'll tell you everything as it happened, or at least as far as I got before I lost control of what I even am. It started with isolated reports, people babbling in completely disconnected places. Tokyo, Buenos Aires, a remote village in Norway, even in the middle of the Arizona desert. At first it seemed random. Ordinary criminals losing their minds, psychiatric patients spiraling into violent episodes, children waking up screaming in the middle of the night. But then something strange began showing up in the medical reports. The victims weren't just hallucinating, they were speaking in languages dead for millennia. Sumerian, Akkadian, dialects that experts took weeks to identify because no one on Earth still used them. And they all said the same thing, words that sounded like fragmented prophecies. The World Eaters are coming. No one knew what it meant. No one wanted to know. Not until the symptoms started progressing. The victims' eyes would roll back, leaving only blank white sclera. They stopped sleeping, their voices growing hoarse from muttering endless streams of nonsense. And then came the visions. Colossal creatures walking through devastated landscapes, cities reduced to ash, massive worms crawling beneath crimson skies. Horrors so grotesque that descriptions left doctors and paramedics traumatized. I personally witnessed one of these victims being interviewed before succumbing. A 40-year-old man, an accountant by trade, who had never shown any signs of mental instability. He sat on a stretcher, trembling uncontrollably, repeating in a voice that didn't seem to belong to him. They will consume everything. The ground will bleed. That's when the government decided to intervene. Unofficially, of course. Officially, these incidents were blamed on viral outbreaks, food poisoning, any mundane explanation that could be sold to the public. But in the shadows, the truth was different. The Department of Homeland Security assigned me to the case almost immediately, but it soon became clear I'd need help. And that help came from NASA. The first meeting with them was tense. I was led into an underground room in Houston, where scientists and military officers gathered around a table covered with maps, charts, and images sent from Mars. The operations director, a thin man named Dr. Elias Monroe, looked directly at me as he displayed a photo of an object discovered during an exploratory mission on Mars months earlier. It was a monolith, black, smooth, perfectly geometric, rising against the red horizon like a cosmic tombstone. This object, he said, his voice low and controlled, began emitting signals 2 weeks ago, frequencies that shouldn't exist, and shortly after, our lead astronaut on the mission reported anomalous behavior. Patient 0. A man named Marcus Hale, one of NASA's best astronauts, sent to investigate the monolith after its sudden activation. At first, his transmissions were normal, technical, filled with scientific jargon, but then he began speaking differently. His voice changed, becoming deeper, more guttural. He mentioned shapes moving in the shadows, whispers echoing inside his helmet. In one of the last transmissions, he screamed something in ancient Sumerian, before cutting off contact permanently. "Is he alive?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Monroe hesitated. "We don't know. We lost contact with the Mars base 5 days ago. This was bigger than anything I'd ever faced. Bigger than political conspiracies, bigger than secret biological experiments. This was another dimension, another level of reality that human minds simply weren't built to process." My first task was to interview some of the terrestrial victims. One woman, in particular, stuck in my memory. Her name was Claire Novak, a 35-year-old university professor who had never shown any interest in the occult or conspiracy theories. When I entered the hospital room where she was being held, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, rocking back and forth, muttering something that sounded like a distorted prayer. Her eyes were completely white, and when she finally noticed me, she turned slowly, as if her muscles were controlled by invisible strings. "You know," she said, her voice dragged and raspy, "that Earth has been eaten before?" I forced myself to stay calm, though every nerve in my body was screaming to run. Eaten? By whom? She smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, too wrong. By the lords of flesh. They return when the soil is ready, when the souls are ripe. Before I could ask more, she tilted her head back and let out a piercing scream so loud it made my ears ring. Nurses rushed in, but I was already leaving, unable to take any more. That woman wasn't insane. She was connected to something much bigger than us. Meanwhile, NASA continued analyzing data from the monolith. They discovered that the signal it emitted wasn't constant. It pulsed at irregular intervals, as if communicating. With what? That was the question. Some extraterrestrial intelligence? A primal force that existed before the stars? Or something even worse? I pressed Monroe for more information, but he was cautious. "You need to understand, Agent Void," he said one night as we examined holographic projections of the monolith. "This thing isn't just an artifact. It's a key. And if we activate whatever's locked on the other side, there may be no turning back." "So why the hell are we here?" I demanded, my patience evaporating. "Why don't we destroy it and end this right now?" "Because we don't know how," Monroe replied, his voice almost a whisper. "And because it might already be too late." Things began escalating rapidly. More reports of global hallucinations emerged, this time accompanied by unexplainable events. Earthquakes occurring in geologically stable regions, animals migrating in anomalous patterns, and, in rare cases, people simply disappearing without a trace. It was as if the planet itself was responding to the monolith's signal. But the worst was yet to come. During a nighttime raid to investigate a series of giant creature sightings in Utah, my team found something we couldn't explain. Enormous tracks in the ground, as if something massive had dragged itself across the landscape. Following the tracks, we arrived at a hidden cave in the mountains. Inside, we found markings etched into the walls, symbols that matched the patterns, carved into the Martian monolith perfectly. And in the center of the cave, there was something that made me wish I'd never been born. A well. Not an ordinary well, but something that seemed to pulse, as if it were breathing. Vague shapes moved beneath its dark surface, forms that shouldn't exist. And as I approached, I felt something inside me awaken. A presence. An echo of that. Signal from Mars, Operation Nightmare isn't over. In fact, I think it's barely begun. But I can feel it growing inside me now, like an infection with no cure. The monolith doesn't choose victims at random. It selects. It prepares. And I think I've been chosen too. If you're hearing this, run. Run while you still can. Because when the World Eaters arrive, there won't be anywhere to hide. The nightmare doesn't stop. It evolves. After Utah, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something ancient. Something vast. Something that didn't belong in this world or any other. The symbols etched into the walls of that cavern haunted my dreams, twisting and writhing like living things. They weren't just markings. They were a language, a code, a warning. And whatever they warned about wasn't confined to Mars anymore. It was here, on Earth, burrowing beneath our feet, spreading through the veins of this planet like an infection. I tried to report what we found in the cave, but Monroe shut me down almost immediately. "You're too close to this now," he said, his voice tight with unease. "If you keep pushing, you'll end up like Hale." Like Hale. The words echoed in my mind, hollow and final. Marcus Hale, the astronaut who had stared into the abyss on Mars and come back, changed. Or maybe he hadn't come back at all. Maybe whatever spoke through him wasn't human anymore. But I couldn't stop. Not after what I'd seen. The pulsating pit in the cavern wasn't dormant. It was waiting. Waiting for something. For someone. And every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it calling to me, whispering promises and threats in equal measure. Promises of knowledge beyond comprehension. Threats of annihilation so absolute it would make extinction seem merciful. My investigation led me to more victims of the phenomenon, scattered across the globe. Each one carried fragments of the same message, delivered in tones that ranged from serene to hysterical. In Cairo, I interviewed a man who claimed to have seen the end of the world, not as a vision, but as a memory. "It's already happened," he said, his voice trembling. "We're just echoes of the first destruction." When I pressed him for details, he grabbed my wrist with unnatural strength and whispered, "They feed on despair. That's how they grow." In Tokyo, a young woman sat curled in the corner of her hospital room, rocking back and forth as she muttered phrases in Sumerian. Her eyes darted around the room as if she could see things no one else could. "They're coming," she repeated, over and over again. "The Devourers. The Void Walkers." Then she looked directly at me, her gaze piercing through me like a blade. "You smell like them." By the time I reached Norway, the pattern was undeniable. These people weren't random. They were chosen, selected by the signal from Mars, connected to the monolith in ways science couldn't explain. And each one seemed to carry a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the truth that the monolith wanted humanity to know. Or perhaps a truth it wanted us to fear. The turning point came when I received classified files from NASA, documents so restricted that even Monroe hesitated before handing them over. They contained transcripts of Marcus Hale's final transmissions from Mars, along with analysis of the signal emitted by the monolith. At first glance, the data seemed incomprehensible. Patterns of light and sound that defied logic, frequencies that shouldn't exist. But buried within the chaos was a structure, a rhythm, almost musical in nature. It wasn't just noise. It was communication. And then I saw it. Hidden within the signal, encoded in layers of static and distortion, was a map. A map of Earth. The locations marked on the map corresponded exactly to where the outbreaks had occurred: Cairo, Tokyo, Utah, Norway. But there was one location that stood out. A place not yet affected, but clearly designated as significant: Antarctica. Specifically, a region known as Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake buried beneath miles of ice. According to the documents, the lake contained microbial life forms unlike anything ever discovered. Organisms that predated humanity by millions of years. Life forms that might not be entirely natural. Monroe confirmed my suspicions when I confronted him. "We've known about Lake Vostok for years," he admitted. "But we kept it quiet. The microbes there, they're older than the planet itself, older than the sun. And now, the signal from Mars is pointing directly at them." "Why?" I demanded. "What's down there?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Something that should never wake up. The journey to Antarctica was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The cold wasn't just physical. It seeped into your soul, freezing hope and reason until all that remained was primal instinct. We set up a research station near the edge of the glacier, drilling deep into the ice to reach the lake below. Every step of the way, I felt it. The presence. Stronger here than anywhere else. It wasn't just in the ice. It was in the air, in the silence, in the way the snow shifted unnaturally beneath our boots. When we broke through to the lake, we found something. A structure. Another monolith, identical to the one on Mars, standing upright in the frozen darkness. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the lights of our equipment in ways that made my head ache. As I approached it, the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping and discordant. They weren't just in my ears anymore. They were inside me, rewriting my thoughts, reshaping my memories. "This isn't possible," Monroe muttered, staring at the monolith with wide, terrified eyes. "How did it get here? How long has it been here?" "It's always been here," I replied, though I didn't know why the words came out of my mouth. Waiting. Before anyone could react, the ground began to tremble. The ice cracked and splintered, sending shards flying in all directions. From the depths of the lake, something emerged. Not fully formed, but enough to send waves of terror crashing over me. Tentacles, impossibly long and sinewy, lashed out, wrapping around the edges of the glacier. Eyes bloomed across their surfaces, blinking in unison, staring at us with an intelligence far beyond anything I could comprehend. And then, Finally, it spoke. Not with words, but with emotions so raw, so primal. They reduced me to tears. "You are chosen," it said, though the voice didn't come from outside. It came from within. "You will awaken the devourers." Back at the research station, chaos erupted. Some of the team members began exhibiting symptoms similar to those of the earlier victims. Speaking in tongues, rolling their eyes back, muttering about colossal creatures walking across a devastated landscape. Others simply collapsed, their bodies convulsing violently, as if possessed by some unseen force. I watched helplessly as the infection spread, consuming everyone around me. Monroe was the last to fall. He grabbed my arm, his grip weak but desperate. "Stop it," he pleaded, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. "Sever the connection. Destroy the monolith!" "How?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of despair. "Tell me how!" But he didn't answer. His body went limp, and his eyes rolled back into his skull, just like the others. Now I'm alone. Alone with the monolith, with the whispers, with the growing certainty that I've been chosen for something far worse than death. Whatever this thing wants, it's using me to achieve it. And as much as I try to resist, I can feel myself slipping, further and further away from who I used to be. If you're hearing this, it means I failed. The devourers are coming, and when they arrive, nothing will remain. The silence after Monroe's death is deafening. It's not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It's oppressive, suffocating, like the weight of an entire planet pressing down on my chest. I sit alone in the research station, staring at the blinking lights of abandoned equipment, their hums and beeps mocking me with their uselessness. Outside, the Antarctic winds howl like mourners at a funeral no one will attend. The storm has worsened since we broke through to Lake Vostok, as if the Earth itself is trying to bury what lies beneath, to smother it before it can fully awaken. But I know better now. Nothing can stop it. Not nature. Not humanity. Not even time. I keep replaying Monroe's final words in my head. Sever the connection. Destroy the monolith. Simple enough advice, but how do you destroy something that seems eternal? How do you sever a connection when you're not even sure what it's connected to? Or worse, when you suspect it's already inside you? Every hour that passes feels like a lifetime. My mind races with questions I can't answer and fears I can't suppress. What are the devourers? Are they physical entities, beings of flesh and bone that will rise from the ice and consume everything in their path? Or are they something more abstract? Forces of entropy, manifestations of chaos made incarnate. And why me? Why was I chosen? Am I a vessel, a prophet, or just another pawn in some cosmic game I'll never understand? The whispers grow louder. They're constant now, overlapping voices speaking in languages I don't recognize, yet somehow understand. Fragments of knowledge flood my consciousness. Visions of civilizations older than stars. Rituals performed by creatures with too many limbs. Songs sung in frequencies that vibrate through dimensions. Each revelation chips away at my sanity, replacing human thought with alien logic. I catch glimpses of myself in reflective surfaces, and each time I look less like Agente Void and more like something else. My skin stretches tight over my bones, translucent and veined with glowing patterns that pulse in rhythm with the monolith. My eyes, once brown and human, are now black voids, reflecting nothing but endless darkness. And then there are the dreams. Vivid, suffocating nightmares that feel more real than waking life. In these dreams, I'm standing in a desolate wasteland under a blood-red sky. Colossal creatures lumber across the horizon, their forms grotesque and incomprehensible. Bloated, masses of writhing flesh, mouths filled with jagged teeth opening wide enough to swallow cities whole. Worm-like entities burrow through the ground, leaving trails of slime and decay in their wake. Above it all, the figure carved into the monolith watches, unmoving, eternal. Its tentacles writhe like serpents, its hollow eyes fixed on mine. When I wake, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, I find scratches on my arms, deep, angry marks that weren't there before. I try to focus on survival, on finding a way out of this madness, but every attempt ends in failure. The radio equipment. is dead, fried by some electromagnetic surge that coincided with the emergence of the second monolith. The snowmobiles outside won't start, their engines frozen solid despite being designed for sub-zero temperatures. Even the food supplies have spoiled, emitting a foul odor that makes my stomach churn. It's as if the environment around me is conspiring to keep me here, to ensure I fulfill whatever purpose the monolith has planned for me. Desperation drives me back to the lake, back to the monolith. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to escape, I descend into the icy depths once again. The structure looms ahead of me, taller and darker than before, its surface rippling like liquid shadow. As I approach, the whispers crescendo into a deafening roar, drowning out all other sound. Shapes flicker in the periphery of my vision. Humanoid figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, their movements jerky and disjointed. They surround me, forming a loose circle that traps me within their gaze. One of them steps forward, raising a hand, not quite human, not quite anything else, and points at the monolith. A single word echoes in my mind, loud and clear despite the absence of sound. Awaken. I reach out, my trembling fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the cracks widen further, splitting open with a deafening roar. Tentacles lash out, wrapping around me, pulling me closer. I scream, but the sound is swallowed by the void. My body dissolves, merging with the monolith, becoming one with the entity trapped inside. Its memories flood my mind, overwhelming me with their sheer magnitude. I see Earth reduced to ash, oceans boiling away, skies filled with ash. Humanity extinguished, scattered across barren wastelands. And above it all, the monolith stands tall, untouched, eternal. As my consciousness fades, consumed by the infinite darkness, I realize the truth. I was never meant to leave. I was never meant to survive. I was chosen to awaken the god, to unleash the apocalypse. The infection spreads like wildfire, but not in the way a virus or disease would. It's subtler, more insidious, a creeping madness that takes root in the minds of its victims long before their bodies begin to betray them. By the time I start noticing patterns in the global reports, it's clear that this isn't random. It's deliberate. The monoliths, both on Mars and beneath Lake Vostok, are targeting specific individuals, selecting them for reasons I can only guess at. And those who are chosen, they don't just die, they become something else. Back in Houston, fragments of data trickle in from around the world. Hospitals overflow with patients exhibiting symptoms eerily similar to those of Marcus Hale and the others I've encountered. At first, the outbreaks seem isolated, random clusters of insanity. But as the days pass, the connections become undeniable. In Cairo, a man named Amir refuses to sleep, claiming that the Watchers visit him whenever he closes his eyes. His wife describes how he spends hours staring at the wall, muttering phrases in Akkadian about the Great Feast. When doctors attempt to sedate him, he screams uncontrollably, clawing at his own skin until it bleeds. He insists he can feel something moving inside. In Tokyo, a teenager named Aiko draws obsessively, filling entire sketchbooks with images of grotesque creatures, bloated worm-like entities with rows of jagged teeth, towering figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, landscapes scorched beyond recognition. Her parents find her one morning standing in the middle of the living room, arms outstretched, whispering in Sumerian. When they try to intervene, she turns to them with blackened sclera and says, "They're already here." These stories repeat themselves across continents, each victim manifesting the same progression. Initial confusion, followed by vivid hallucinations, then physical degradation. Their eyes roll back into their skulls, their voices deepen into guttural tones, and eventually, their bodies contort into unnatural positions. Some develop strange markings on their skin, patterns that resemble the symbols etched into the monoliths. Others emit low-frequency sounds, audible only when recorded and played back at slower speeds. These sounds match the rhythm of the signal emanating from Mars. But the most disturbing aspect is what happens after. Many victims report seeing the same vision, a desolate wasteland under a crimson sky, populated by colossal beings that defy description. They speak of being chosen, of having a purpose they cannot explain. And then, Without warning, they disappear. Not physically, at least not always, but mentally. Their personalities dissolve, replaced by something alien, something ancient. One moment they're human. The next, they're vessels for an intelligence far older than humanity itself. I pore over the data obsessively, searching for answers. Why these people? What makes them special or vulnerable? The pattern becomes clearer the deeper I dig. Each victim shares certain traits: heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, unusually high levels of neural activity, even genetic markers linked to ancient populations. It's as if the monoliths are scanning the planet, identifying individuals whose minds are uniquely attuned to their frequency. Once identified, they're infected, not with a pathogen, but with knowledge. Knowledge too vast, too incomprehensible for the human brain to process, and yet, there's more to it than that. The victims aren't just conduits, they're catalysts. Every time one succumbs, the signal grows stronger. The whispers intensify, the cracks in reality widen. Entire regions experience phenomena that defy explanation. Earthquakes where tectonic plates shouldn't shift. Auroras appearing in places they've never been seen before. Animals migrating en masse towards seemingly random locations. It's as if the Earth itself is responding to the awakening, preparing for something catastrophic. The impact on society is equally alarming. Governments scramble to contain the chaos, imposing curfews and censoring media coverage of the outbreaks. But rumors spread faster than any official statement. Conspiracy theories explode online, ranging from government experiments gone wrong to extraterrestrial invasions. Panic sets in as people realize the truth. Something is coming. Something unstoppable. In cities around the world, riots break out. Crowds gather in public squares, chanting phrases in languages no one understands. Some claim to have received visions during the night, showing them glimpses of the future. Others insist they've seen the devourers walking among us, their forms flickering in and out of existence like static on a broken screen. Temples and churches fill with desperate worshippers praying for salvation, while cults emerge overnight, proclaiming the end of days. Amid the chaos, I receive a transmission from a source within NASA, a whistleblower who claims to know more about the monoliths than Monroe ever revealed. According to them, the structures aren't just artifacts, they're nodes in a network spanning the galaxy. Each one emits a signal that resonates with dormant life forms buried deep within planets. Life forms that predate the universe itself. They're not waking up because we activated them, the voice on the other end of the line explains. We gave them permission. Permission? I ask, my stomach twisting into knots. How? By looking, comes the reply. By touching. By acknowledging their existence. That's all it takes. The realization hits me like a meteor strike. Everything we've done, the missions to Mars, the excavation at Lake Vostok, we didn't awaken the monoliths. We answered their call. And now, whatever lies beyond the veil is stirring, responding to our presence. The devourers aren't coming from outside. They're already here, buried beneath the ice, hidden in the shadows, waiting. As I sit alone in the research station, surrounded by the remnants of my failed mission, I feel it again. The pull, the whispers. They're louder now, overlapping in a symphony of madness. I glance at my reflection in the cracked window and see it clearly. The transformation is nearly complete. My skin glows faintly, veins pulsing with light. My eyes are voids, reflecting nothing but darkness. And yet, I'm still aware enough to understand what's happening. The monolith chose me because I'm strong, because I can endure the weight of what's coming, because I can guide the devourers to their prey. If you're hearing this, it means I've already failed. The apocalypse isn't a storm, it's a tide, and it's rising faster than anyone anticipated. The tide of madness rises higher with each passing day, and I can feel it pulling me under. The world outside the research station is unraveling at an alarming rate, but what terrifies me most is the unraveling within myself. My thoughts are no longer my own. They're fragmented, disjointed, like shards of glass reflecting distorted images of reality. The whispers have become a constant presence, their voices overlapping in a cacophony that drowns out all other sound. Sometimes they speak in languages I recognize. Other times, They communicate through sensations, waves of dread, bursts of euphoria, flashes of pain so intense they leave me gasping for air. It's as if the entity inside the monolith is rewriting my consciousness, layer by layer, until there's nothing left but a hollow shell. But I'm not alone in this descent into chaos. Reports from around the globe paint a picture of humanity teetering on the brink of collapse. Entire cities have been abandoned as people flee in terror, seeking refuge in remote areas where the signal seems weaker or non-existent. Governments struggle to maintain order, but their efforts are futile against an enemy that doesn't fight with weapons or armies. This isn't war, it's annihilation, and the devourers haven't even arrived yet. In London, riots erupt after a woman steps onto the roof of a skyscraper and begins reciting prophecies in a language that hasn't been spoken in millennia. She claims to see the end unfolding before her eyes. A vision of fire raining from the sky and oceans boiling away. When authorities attempt to intervene, she leaps off the building, shouting a single phrase in perfect Latin. Mors vincit omnia. Death conquers all. In São Paulo, a child draws intricate diagrams on the walls of his home using crayons and blood. His own blood, which he extracts willingly with a shard of broken glass. His parents find him hours later, sitting, motionless in the center of the room, staring at the ceiling with blackened sclera. When asked what he sees, he replies calmly, "The ones who eat stars." These stories repeat themselves endlessly, each one more horrifying than the last. The victims aren't just losing their minds, they're becoming conduits for something far greater, something ancient, something hungry. I try to piece together the timeline, searching for patterns in the outbreaks. What I discover chills me to the core. The progression isn't random, it's accelerating. Each new case occurs closer to the epicenter of the signal, whether that signal originates from Mars, Lake Vostok, or someplace else entirely. And the symptoms grow worse with each iteration. Early victims exhibited mild hallucinations and insomnia. Later cases involved physical mutations. Elongated limbs, translucent skin, glowing veins. Now, entire populations are succumbing to full-blown psychosis, their bodies transforming into grotesque parodies of human anatomy. It's not just individuals anymore. Groups of victims begin exhibiting hive mind behavior, moving in unison as if controlled by a single intelligence. In Moscow, a crowd of over 200 people gathers silently in Red Square, their heads tilted upward toward the sky. They remain motionless for hours, ignoring pleas from authorities and loved ones alike. Then, without warning, they start screaming, a deafening chorus of voices speaking in unison, chanting phrases in Sumerian about the Great Feast. Moments later, they collapse en masse, their bodies dissolving into ash. What's happening? To them, are they dying, ascending, becoming part of something larger? I don't know. But I do know one thing. Whatever fate awaits them, it's only a matter of time before it comes for everyone else. Back at the research station, I review the data obsessively, hoping to find some clue, a way to stop this before it's too late. But the more I learn, the clearer it becomes that resistance is futile. The monoliths aren't machines or artifacts, they're organisms, living, breathing entities that exist beyond the boundaries of space and time. Their purpose isn't destruction, it's consumption. They feed on despair, on fear, on the collective unconscious of every living being they encounter. And when they've consumed enough, they awaken the devourers. That's why the victims are chosen. Not because they're weak, but because they're strong. Their heightened sensitivity makes them ideal hosts, capable of channeling the monolith's energy, without being immediately destroyed. Once infected, they act as amplifiers, spreading the signal further and faster than any technology ever could. Every scream, every hallucination, every mutation, it's all part of the process. A process I've unwittingly become a part of. The final stage of transformation begins without warning. One moment, I'm sitting at the desk in the research station, reviewing files and trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. The next, I'm doubled over in agony, clutching my head, as waves of pain crash over me. My vision blurs, colors bleeding together into a kaleidoscope of chaos. Shadows writhe across the walls, twisting into shapes that resemble the figures I've seen in my dreams. Tentacles slither across the floor, emerging from cracks that weren't there before. Eyes bloom in the darkness, blinking in unison, staring. at me with an intelligence far beyond anything I could comprehend. And then, the voice. Not in my ears, but inside my mind. Deep, resonant, vibrating through every cell in my body. "You are ready," it says. Ready for what? I want to ask, but the words catch in my throat, choking me with their weight. Instead, I stagger to my feet, drawn by an instinct I can't control. Outside, the storm rages on, wind howling like a banshee mourning the death of the world. I step into the freezing cold, my breath fogging up instantly despite the fact that I no longer feel the temperature. The ground beneath my boots trembles, shifting and cracking as if alive. From the fissures, tendrils of black smoke rise, coiling around me like snakes. At the edge of the glacier, the second monolith looms taller than ever, its surface shimmering, faintly reflecting the dim light of the overcast sky. As I approach, the whispers crescendo into a deafening roar, drowning out all other sound. Shapes flicker in the periphery of my vision. Humanoid figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, their movements jerky and disjointed. They surround me, forming a loose circle that traps me within their gaze. One of them steps forward, raising a hand, not quite human, not quite anything else, and points at the monolith. A single word echoes in my mind, loud and clear despite the absence of sound. Awaken. I reach out, my trembling fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the cracks widen further, splitting open with a deafening roar. Tentacles lash out, wrapping around me, pulling me closer. I scream, but the sound is swallowed by the void. My body dissolves, merging with the monolith, becoming one with the entity trapped inside. Its memories flood my mind, overwhelming me with their sheer magnitude. I see Earth reduced to ash, oceans boiling away, skies filled with ash, humanity extinguished, scattered across barren wastelands. And above it all, the monolith stands tall, untouched, eternal. As my consciousness fades, consumed by the infinite darkness, I realize the truth. I was never meant to leave. I was never meant to survive. I was chosen to awaken the god, to unleash the apocalypse. If you're hearing this, it means it's already begun. The devourers are coming, and when they arrive, nothing will remain.